Okay, moving right along. This is Fallout Shelter, Designing for Civil Defense in the Cold War by David Monteyne. We'll go with that. This is from, I believe, around 2010 or 11 or so. Let's see. This was ill prepared. 2011. So Fallout Shelter from 2011. I collect all kinds of books, anything I can find on Cold War architecture, Cold War infrastructure, anything like that. I'm really fascinated with that, especially that era of 60s to mid 80s, that planning, atomic warfare planning. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And what's really interested me lately is, in light of a lot of the things happening in Ukraine and Russia, is how much it's obvious how better prepared the Eastern Europeans were for nuclear warfare than the United States. So now there's different schools of thought on that, about whether or not the nuclear weapons are even capable of doing the things they say. And with that in mind, it appears that the former Soviet Union believed that they were very real and very powerful based on the number of bunkers, just the sheer magnitude of preparation they did in the way of shelters for their civilian population. In the United States, what we wound up with was a lot of like parking garages and basements with a Fallout Shelter sign slapped on the front. But what this is, this author did a bang-up job of going through and visiting some of these Cold War fallout shelters, giving a lot of history on locations and design and construction techniques. A lot of really good stuff about, and a lot of rare drawings, and a lot of good stuff about, just a lot of good Cold War information. And the funny thing about this was, I actually looked this up the other day when I found this in my library, and this has actually gotten fairly expensive. I think I paid like 12 or 13 bucks or so for it when I bought it a few years ago, and now I think an actual physical copy of it goes for a pretty good amount. I think you can still get a Kindle version for cheap, but yeah, an actual physical copy is not cheap. But anyway, this has some really good information about Cold War nuclear planning and fallout shelter construction, and just a lot of interesting stuff about underground facilities. And again, most of it was really, a lot of the fallout shelters here in the States were just dual purpose facilities like parking garages and basements. But really fascinating. If you're into Cold War infrastructure, this is a great book. And there's a few websites, and I think he cites them in here too, about Cold War infrastructure that are great to browse and look at some of that stuff. But it really does make you wonder. Some of you who have talked about, we've gotten into discussions in the comment section about the existence of nuclear weapons, and there's I didn't realize until just the last few years that there's a big split over whether or not atomic weaponry, it does the things it is purported to do. And again, that's one of those things I'm kind of an agnostic on. Obviously, I've never witnessed personally a nuclear detonation, so I have no hard opinion on that one way or the other. But the idea of nuclear weaponry being a kind of a PR trick in order to achieve political gains, I don't rule that out. I also don't rule out the idea that nuclear weapons could in fact be very real, and the proliferation could be way greater than what we've realized. I've heard rumors about nuclear weapons being deployed in Iraq, for instance. So again, but it's all rumors, so a lot of that is really hard to pin down. But back to Fallout Shelter, great book on the subject. And again, it is very interesting to contrast this with, just if you go online and look at some articles about what kind of civil defense planning was done in Eastern Europe. In Ukraine, it's interesting, we hear all the time now about Ukrainian bunkers like the Azov dudes that were holed up in the steel plant there. So there's a lot of, they had much more sophisticated, hardened shelters for their civilian population than the United States. And I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts on that. But anyway, good stuff. If you're into Cold War planning, I highly recommend this. And at the end of this video, I'm going to link to my road trip that in the Greenbrier bunker video, because as you might have guessed, this is something that I dug into a lot.